This is Judge Joan Donoghue, the President of the International Court of Justice. It is probably fair to say that she will not be getting the freedom of Tel Aviv anytime soon. We'll be looking at the historical judgment she delivered last week, as well as your council tax, the end of the steel industry in the UK, and the prospects of World War III. I'm Harvey John. Welcome to the Critical Mass News Review. We start with Gaza. Following the historic interim ruling of the ICJ that Israel had to stop committing acts that could be regarded as genocide and had to stop promoting the idea of genocide, its apologists in the West have been backtracking like crazy. The ruling, perhaps the most significant international judgment since Nuremberg, supported many of the allegations made by South Africa. It is worth us considering the words of the judgment. This is Court President Joan Donoghue delivering the verdict.
In the Court's view, the aforementioned facts and circumstances are sufficient to conclude that at least some of the rights claimed by South Africa and for which it is seeking protection are plausible. This is the case with respect to the right of Palestinians in Gaza to be protected from acts of genocide and related prohibited acts identified in Article 3, and the right of South Africa to seek Israel's compliance with the latter's obligations under the Convention.
Some people have made the point that the ICJ did not rule that Israel was committing genocide, as if that alone means that they are not. But look at the words used by the 17 judges. The facts and circumstances establish a plausible case that the Palestinians are being denied their right to be protected from acts of genocide. In other words, Israel is plausibly committing acts of genocide and should stop. Why then do politicians in the West find it so hard to condemn Israel? This is Angela Rayner avoiding using the word genocide and ceasefire.
There are aspects of genocide in the dictionary version of genocide.
I don't know.
Let's be honest. Rayner and the entire political establishment continue to be apologists for Israel. But that might come back to bite them one day, as Israeli historian Riz Segal told American website Democracy Now!
It's difficult to say what the U.S. will do, but we do know actually that in Europe there are more and more states, not Germany, but more and more states that have already said and will in various ways need to abide by the court ruling, which may be very significant in terms of obstructing arms deals, refusing to facilitate transfer of arms to Israel through Europe and various other measures.
If, as seems likely, Israel is in contravention of the Genocide Act, then those supporting them could well find themselves in the docks as accomplices. The plausibility of that outcome is not just a matter of opinion. The instructions to Israel are pretty far-reaching. Let's have another listen to Judge Donoghue instructing Israel what their responsibilities are under the law.
The Court considers that, with regard to the present situation, Israel must, in accordance with its obligations under the Genocide Convention, in relation to Palestinians in Gaza, take all measures within its power to prevent the commission of all acts within the scope of Article 2 of the Convention, in particular, A, killing members of the group, B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, and D, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group.
Although there is no use of the word ceasefire, there is a very specific and now legally binding commitment on the State of Israel. They must not kill members of the group. They must not cause serious injury or mental harm. They must avoid actions which have the effect of bringing about physical destruction in whole or part of the group. They must allow women to give birth. How are they going to achieve this without stopping their military campaign? They also have to prevent the incitement to commit genocide. These are far-reaching instructions. Politicians who, until now, have been happy to allow Israel to just do what they want are now also legally obliged to prevent these acts. So what has been the reaction to this historic ruling? Here's Netanyahu.
Like every country, Israel has an inherent right to defend itself.
The vile attempt to deny Israel this fundamental right is blatant discrimination against the Jewish state, and it was justly rejected. The charge of genocide leveled against Israel is not only false, it's outrageous, and decent people everywhere should reject it. Our war is against Hamas terrorists, not against Palestinian civilians. We will continue to do what is necessary to defend our country and defend our people.
There is nothing but outrage and defiance in his tone. He simply repeats, as do his apologists in the West, the old line that Israel has the right to defend itself. It does, but it does not have the right to label every Palestinian a terrorist and then wipe them out. That is not self-defense, it is genocide. Since the ruling, the Israelis have killed at least another 700 people in Gaza. It is fair to say that international law is itself on trial here. If Israel continues to ignore the international court, what will happen? Palestinian lawyer Diana Boutou said that the BDS movement must now intensify. This is her speaking to Democracy Now!
So once again, we will likely see that Israel is going to ignore this ruling. It's then imperative to take it to the UN Security Council. But all the while, it's very important that we continue to boycott Israel, to divest from Israel, and to push for sanctions, that the global BDS movement should be growing at this point to make sure that the age of Israeli impunity finally comes to an end.
Meanwhile, not only has Israel continued to bombard Gaza, exacerbating the conditions which the ICJ say are plausibly genocidal, but they have widened their attacks to the UN itself. This is a clip of former Foreign Ministry official Noga Arbel.
שיטות, ואי אפשר יהיה לנצח את המלחמה אם אנחנו לא נשמיד את אונר"א, וההשמדה הזו חייבת להתחיל מיד. את התעודות של אונר"א אי אפשר להעביר, צריך לבטל. הורתן בחטא, הן צריכות ללכת לפח.
By a strange coincidence, Israel made allegations against members of UNRWA on Saturday, the day after they were told to stop engaging in acts of genocide. UNRWA is one of the main suppliers of humanitarian aid to Gaza. It is funded in the main by the US, but also by a number of other countries. Whilst neither the US nor the UK have had much to say about the ICJ ruling beyond asserting Israel's right to defend itself, both immediately suspended funding to the UNRWA in the wake of Israel's allegations. It seems that truths coming out of an international court are perplexing for our leaders, but unsubstantial allegations emerging from Israel must always be believed. At Critical Mass, we do not believe that simply condemning acts brings much in the way of settlement. On the other hand, we note that the political classes seem incapable of condemning Israel. It is left to ordinary people to march and demonstrate in solidarity with the Palestinians, as we will be doing again in our thousands this week. As the general election edges closer, we can expect more and more desperate measures by Rishi Sunak to save his political skin. His attempt to present himself as a hard man by reactivating the Rwanda policy has run into problems, as the Lords have shown a bit of backbone in voting against it. Marilyn Tyzek on creatingsocialism.org wrote this. His new treaty with Rwanda is seen as illegal, immoral and unworkable, not to mention a form of psychological torture, the hard right viewing it as not having gone far enough and the Supreme Court having declared the policy violates international law. Sunak is not a hard man, merely a desperate one, but nowhere near as desperate as the asylum seekers he is so determined to stop finding asylum in the UK. Do you feel a sense of despair when you go get your council tax bill? Wonder why you seem to pay more each year for fewer services? Some of the answers can be found in the fact that local councils in Britain have had debts of £97.8 billion. Experts predict that half of local authorities are heading into debt. This is not the fault of councils. It is not that they cannot manage their finances. This is a direct result of government policy. The current crisis began with the Tory policy of austerity. After the financial crash in 2008, the Conservative Lib Dem coalition that took power in 2010 spent billions propping up the banks and slashing local authority budgets to help pay for it. As Mike Stanton wrote on creatingsocialism.org, budgets went down just as needs and demands for essential services went up because more people were pushed into poverty as benefits were frozen or cut. The Tories have made sure it is Labour councils plus Labour-controlled Welsh Government and SNP-controlled Scottish Government that are getting the blame for their policies. Sadly, it is unlikely that changing the government will help much. Starmer's Labour have made no commitment to restoring local authority and devolved government spending power. Britain was once the workshop of the world. The Industrial Revolution was fuelled by coal mines of South Wales, which in turn provided the steel necessary for heavy industries which made Britain rich. You may have thought that the steel industry in the UK was already dead and buried. Not quite. The last remaining steelworks is in South Wales. Last week, engine company Tata Steel announced 3,000 job losses at Port Talbot in South Wales. This despite receiving a £500 million handout from the British government. Tata has said that the job losses are a consequence of replacing coal-powered blast furnaces with new sustainable electric arc furnaces. According to the company, this untested technology is all part of their commitment to green energy. But this commitment to green energy does not stretch to their own backyard. They plan to build a new industrial complex in East India, which will produce over twice the carbon emissions of Port Talbot. So why the move? Tata has benefited from government handouts to maintain what is left of the UK steel industry. They are still open to further handouts. But even with huge subsidies, Indian workers don't benefit from a guaranteed minimum wage as UK workers do. They are also less likely to be unionised. Tata has promised to help workers train for new jobs. What they don't say is where those jobs are going to come from. The same promises were made to mining communities when the mines were closed down. Most of the redundant mine workers never worked again. The Welsh Government and local councils have sold Wales as a low-paid workforce, but even cutting wages and increasing productivity hasn't allowed workers in Port Talbot to compete. We think that the unions need to do more than just say to keep the steelworks open. We need to wean British industry off a reliance on multinational companies who show no loyalty to their workforce once the subsidies disappear. This is Tobias Elwood, and this is what he had to say about plans to create a citizens' army.
We've been too complacent. I think I've said this many times with you. What's coming over the horizon should shock us. It should worry us, and we are not prepared. We've had a couple of decades, 3 decades or so since the Cold War. Life has gone well. It's now going to get more difficult. So Patrick Saunders is saying, prepare for what's coming over the horizon. There is a 1939 feel to the world right now.
This follows from British Army Chief of Staff Patrick Sanders calling for an increase in the armed forces to counter the threat from Russia. The standoff between NATO and Russia is being played out in real time in Ukraine, where to date 500,000 people have died. But are we really under imminent threat of land invasion from Russia? Since the war started, critical mass has called for diplomatic efforts to resolve the conflict, but both Britain and the USA have preferred to stoke the fires of war and paint the Russians as the aggressors. The rhetoric stoked by the right and their media seems to be aimed at increasingly hostility between all things Russian and creating an environment of paranoia, which in turn will enable even more draconian laws. With all that is happening in Gaza at the moment, we can see quite clearly the effect of more warmongering. I'm sure I speak for most ordinary people, and especially young people, who will be forced into these citizen armies when I say that is the last thing we need. More warfare. Where are the politicians and mainstream journalists making the case for peace? Where? Show me them. That's it for the Critical Mass News Review for this time. We'll be back in a fortnight. Until then, this is Harvey John, signing off.